In the underworld of Chicago, silence is usually the only way to stay alive. But for 20-year-old Clara Hayes, silence became the loudest weapon she possessed. Standing tableside at the city's most dangerous restaurant, she locked eyes with Casey Vane, the man the FBI calls the architect of organized crime, and made a single, subtle hand gesture. It wasn't a plea for mercy. It was a warning. That one split-second decision didn't just save a life. It ignited a war that would burn the city to the ground. What was the signal? And why was a penniless waitress the only one who saw the assassin coming? This is the story of the girl who didn't just survive the mafia. She changed it forever. The restaurant was called Le Ciel, but the locals in the meatpacking district called it the Morgue with a Valet. It was the kind of place where a steak cost $300, and the wine list was older than the United States Constitution. It was also the sovereign territory of the Vane crime family. Clara Hayes adjusted her apron, her hands trembling slightly. She was 20 years old, with chestnut hair pulled back into a severe bun and eyes the color of bruised steel. She was invisible here. That was the point. When you are drowning in debt from your late mother's hospital bills and hiding from a landlord who looks more like a pit bull than a human being, invisibility is a superpower. "Table 4, Clara, don't mess it up," the floor manager, a greasy man named Rickard, hissed in her ear. "And for God's sake, don't look them in the eye." Table 4 was the power table. It sat in the back corner, flanked by velvet curtains and soundproof glass. Tonight, it was occupied by 3 men. 2 were muscle, thick necks, suits that strained at the shoulders, eyes scanning the room like radar. The third man was different. He was leaning back, swirling a glass of amber scotch. Casey Vane. Even if you didn't read the crime beat in the Chicago Tribune, you knew Casey Vane. He wasn't the loud, brash gangster of the movies. He was 32, sharp-featured, and dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than Clara would make in 10 years. He had the cold, terrifying stillness of a predator that has already eaten and is just watching the herd for sport. Clara picked up the heavy silver tray. Her job was simple: deliver the osso buco, refill the water, disappear. As she navigated the dining floor, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew heavy. A man in a waiter's uniform she didn't recognize was coming out of the service bar. He wasn't one of the regulars. He moved too efficiently. Clara paused by a decorative fern, watching him. The new waiter was carrying a fresh bottle of scotch toward table 4. As he adjusted the bottle on his tray, Clara saw it. A tiny, almost imperceptible motion. He slid a needle-thin capsule from his sleeve and popped it into the decanter. It dissolved instantly. Ice flooded Clara's veins. She knew that movement. She had grown up in a neighborhood where drug deals happened on the playground swings. She knew a spike when she saw one. The hit was on, and it was happening in 30 seconds. If she screamed, the fake waiter would shoot her. If she dropped her tray, the noise would draw attention, but the poison would still reach the table. If she did nothing, Casey Vane would be dead before the appetizers were cleared. "Why do I care?" she thought desperately. "He's a monster. Let him die." But Clara had a problem. If a boss dies on her shift, in her section, everyone working that night becomes a loose end. The Vane family wouldn't interrogate the staff. They would liquidate them. Her survival was tied to his. She walked towards the table, her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. The fake waiter arrived first. "Compliments of Mr. Rousseau, sir," the man said, his voice smooth, placing the poisoned decanter on the table. Casey Vane didn't look up. He was reading a message on his phone. "Leave it," he said dismissively. The assassin bowed and stepped back, retreating into the shadows to watch his handiwork. Clara approached. She had to pour the water. It was her only chance. She stepped up to the table, the crystal pitcher heavy in her hand. Casey looked up then. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and utterly devoid of warmth. He looked at her like she was a piece of furniture. Clara didn't speak. She couldn't. The assassin was watching from the service station 10 feet away. She poured the water into Casey's glass. As she lifted the pitcher, she caught his gaze. She didn't blink. She held her left hand against her apron, shielded from the rest of the room but visible to him. She tucked her thumb into her palm, then trapped it with her 4 fingers. The violence signal. Then she did something risky. She tapped her index finger twice on the rim of the Scotch glass, the one the assassin had just delivered, and then slashed her finger across her throat in a micro-movement. It took less than a second. Casey Vane didn't flinch. He didn't frown. He simply stopped swirling his drink. He looked at the Scotch. Then he looked at the fake waiter hovering in the distance. Then he looked back at Clara. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Clara felt sweat trickle down her spine. Had he understood? Or did he think she was just a clumsy, weird waitress threatening him? Casey reached for the Scotch glass. Clara's breath hitched. He didn't believe me. Casey lifted the glass. He brought it to his lips, but he didn't drink. He smelled it. A subtle, sharp inhale. He set the glass down with a heavy clack. "Enzo," Casey said softly. The bodyguard on his right snapped to attention. "Boss?" "The waiter who brought this," Casey said. His voice conversational, as if discussing the weather. "Bring him to the kitchen and lock the doors." The energy in the room snapped from luxury dining to a war zone in a heartbeat. Enzo and the other guard were up and moving before Clara could even step back. Casey stood up. He towered over her. Up close, he smelled of expensive tobacco and gunpowder. "You," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Come with me." I have tables, sir," Clara stammered, falling back into her role. "Not anymore," Casey replied. He reached out, his hand gripping her upper arm. It wasn't rough, but it was iron firm. "You just became the most important person in this room." Clara didn't have a choice. Being escorted out of Lisieux by Casey Vane was like being walked out of the Vatican by the Pope. Everyone stared, and everyone was terrified. Enzo had already tackled the fake waiter by the kitchen doors. There was a sickening crunch, a muffled shout, and then the assassin was dragged out of sight. The diners went silent, forks hovering halfway to their mouths. "Keep walking," Casey commanded, steering Clara through the side exit into the alleyway. The cold Chicago wind hit her face, stinging her eyes. 3 black SUVs were idling there, engines purring like large cats. "Get in," Casey said, opening the back door of the middle vehicle. "I'm not getting in a car with you," Clara said, her voice shaking but her chin high. "I saved your life. That makes us even. I'm going home." Casey paused. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. He seemed amused, which was somehow more terrifying than his anger. "Miss Hayes, Clara Hayes, Miss Hayes, that man inside was a contract killer for the Bratva. Do you think he came alone? Do you think he doesn't have a spotter across the street watching who ruined the hit?" Casey leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "If you walk down that street to catch your bus, you will be dead before you reach the corner. You interfered in mafia business. You are a combatant now." Clara looked towards the end of the alley. A sedan with tinted windows was parked under a flickering streetlight. As she watched, the headlights turned on. "Get in," Casey said. Clara got in. The interior of the SUV was leather and silence. Casey slid in next to her. The car began to move before the door was fully closed. "Where are we going?" Clara asked, clutching her apron. She realized she was still holding a linen napkin from the restaurant. "A safe house," Casey said. He pulled out his phone and typed a message. "Tell me, Clara, where did a waitress at a French bistro learn the international signal for distress? And how did you spot a cyanide spike that my own security detail missed?" Clara looked out the window as the city blurred by. "I have eyes. Your security detail was too busy looking at the women at table 6. Casey let out a short, dry chuckle. "Fair point. And the signal?" Clara stiffened. "My father," she said quietly. He wasn't a good man. I learned to signal for help a long time ago. It just never worked for me. Casey went quiet. The atmosphere in the car shifted from interrogation to something heavier. He looked at her hands, which were white-knuckled on her lap. "It worked tonight," he said. The car swerved suddenly. "Boss!" the driver shouted. "We've got a tail! 2 cars, aggressive!" Casey didn't panic. He didn't even raise his voice. He reached under his seat and pulled out a subcompact pistol. He checked the chamber and placed it on the console. "Enzo, status?" Casey spoke into a small earpiece. "We extracted the information from the waiter, boss." Enzo's voice crackled through the car's speakers. "It's a coup. The Volkov family. They're hitting all your locations tonight. You can't go to the penthouse." "We're currently being pursued," Casey said calmly. "Reroute us to the safe harbor loft and clear the streets." 10. Bullets pinged against the back of the SUV. The sound was like hail on a tin roof, sharp and metallic. Clara ducked, covering her head. "Stay down," Casey ordered. He wasn't looking at her. He was watching the rear-view mirror, calculating. The SUV took a sharp right, tires screeching. Clara was thrown against Casey. His arm shot out, bracing her against the seat, preventing her from hitting the window. For a second, she was pressed against his chest. She could feel the steady beat of his heart. It wasn't racing. He was perfectly calm in the middle of a shootout. "Hold on!" the driver yelled. The SUV slammed through a chain-link fence and careened into an industrial shipyard. The pursuing cars hesitated at the gate. "They won't follow us in here," Casey said. "This is neutral ground. The Irish run the docks." The car slowed to a halt behind a stack of shipping containers. The driver killed the lights. Casey turned to Clara. In the dim light of the dashboard, his face was angular, shadowed. "You have a choice, Clara," he said. "I thought I didn't have choices," she snapped, adrenaline making her bold. "You can walk away right now. I'll give you $10,000 cash and a plane ticket to anywhere. You disappear. You never look back." Clara's heart skipped a beat. $10,000. That was freedom. That was debt relief. That was a new life. "Or?" she asked. "Or?" Casey said, his eyes locking onto hers, intense and dark. "You stay. You saw the poison because you have instincts. You kept your cool. You saved my life when my own men failed. I need people who can see what others miss. You want me to work for you." "I want you to be my eyes," Casey said. "Volkov is coming for me. There is a mole in my organization. I don't know who to trust. But I know I can trust you." "Why?" "Because you had the chance to let me die, and you didn't." Clara looked at the gun on the console. She looked at the man who ruled the city's darkness. She thought about her empty apartment, the eviction notices, the fear of living paycheck to paycheck. This was danger. But it was also power. "I don't want the plane ticket," Clara whispered. Casey smiled. It was a terrifying, beautiful thing. "Good," he said. "Then welcome to the family, Clara." The safe harbor wasn't a loft. It was a fortress in the sky. Located in a repurposed industrial spire overlooking the Chicago River, the elevator opened directly into a sprawling space of concrete, steel, and floor-to-ceiling glass. Clara stepped out, her sneakers squeaking on the polished concrete. She felt small, filthy. She still smelled like stale coffee and fear. "Enzo, secure the perimeter. No one in or out without my biometric authorization," Casey commanded, walking straight to a massive mahogany desk that dominated the center of the room. He tossed his jacket onto a leather couch. "And get Miss Hayes something to eat. Real food, not takeout." Enzo, the burly bodyguard who looked like he chewed rocks for breakfast, glared at Clara. "Boss, with all due respect, she's a civilian. She's a liability. We should pay her and dump her in Nebraska." "She saw the needle, Enzo," Casey said without looking up, already typing on a secure terminal. "You didn't." Enzo's jaw tightened. He shot Clara a look of pure venom before stalking off towards the kitchen area. Clara stood awkwardly in the middle of the room. "What happens now?" Casey stopped typing. He swiveled his chair to face her. "Now, we strip you down." Clara took a step back, her hands flying to her chest. "Excuse me?" Casey blinked, then let out a rare, genuine laugh. It softened the hard lines of his face for a fleeting second. "Metaphorically, Clara, and tactically. Right now, you look like a victim. You look like prey. If you are going to walk beside me, you need to look like a predator." He stood and walked over to a wall of monitors displaying camera feeds from across the city. "The Volkov family made a move tonight because they think I'm weak. They think I'm distracted. They have someone on the inside feeding them my schedule. That's how they knew I'd be at Le Ciel." "The mole," Clara said. "Exactly. I have 4 lieutenants who run my operations. One of them sold me out. Tomorrow night, there is a gala at the Art Institute. Neutral ground. All the families will be there to pretend they are civilized members of society. I need to know which of my men is lying to my face." "And you want me to tell you?" Clara asked incredulously. "I'm a waitress. I don't know how to interrogate mobsters." "I don't need you to interrogate them," Casey said, stepping closer. The intensity in his eyes pinned her in place. "I have men who can break bones. I have hackers who can drain bank accounts. But I don't have anyone who notices that a man is sweating when the air conditioning is on. I don't have anyone who notices a micro-expression of guilt. You noticed a poison pill in a busy restaurant from 20 feet away. You have the gift of sight, Clara. I want you to watch them." Enzo returned, shoving a plate of steak and roasted vegetables onto a side table. "Eat," he grunted. Clara realized she was starving. She sat and ate with a dignity she tried hard to maintain, despite her shaking hands. After she finished, Casey threw a tablet onto the table. "Study these. These are the 4 suspects. Dominic, the money man, Leo, the enforcer, Arthur, the politician, and Sarah, the logistics coordinator. Memorize their faces. Memorize their habits. And then, Casey said, go to the guest suite. Shower, sleep. Tomorrow my stylist arrives at 8 a.m. You are Clara Hayes, the waitress no longer. Tomorrow you are Clara Vane, my distant cousin from Europe. From my new consultant. Lying to the Mafia seems like a bad idea, Clara noted. The truth is a luxury we can't afford, Casey replied. Sleep well, Clara. Tomorrow, we go to war. Clara didn't sleep well. The guest suite was bigger than her entire apartment, the sheets made of silk that felt like water against her skin. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw the fake waiter's face as Enzo broke his neck. She woke up before dawn, pulled by an old habit. She sat by the window, watching the sunrise over the grey city. She looked at the tablet Casey had given her. Dominic. Slick hair, expensive suits, handles the casinos. Leo. Scarred, brutal, handles the street drugs. Arthur. Older, grandfatherly, handles the unions and legal fronts. Sarah. Sharp, cold, handles shipping and imports. Clara scrolled through the financial reports attached to their files. It was a mess of numbers, shell companies, and offshore accounts. But Clara had spent her life juggling 3 jobs, calculating interest rates on payday loans, and figuring out exactly how many calories she could afford per dollar. She knew how to stretch a penny, and more importantly, she knew what it looked like when money was missing. Her eyes narrowed. She zoomed in on Arthur's file, the grandfatherly advisor. There were small withdrawals, tiny, irregular, labeled as charitable consulting fees. They were always just below the threshold that would trigger an automatic audit by Casey's accountants. Clara checked the dates. January 12th, February 14th, March 20th. She pulled up the Chicago social calendar on her own cracked phone. January 12th, a Volkov family wedding. February 14th, the Volkov patriarch's birthday. March 20th, the anniversary of the Volkov matriarch's death. Arthur wasn't stealing money. He was buying gifts. You're awake early. Clara jumped. Casey was leaning against the doorframe. He was shirtless, revealing a torso mapped with scars, bullet wounds, knife slashes, a tapestry of violence. He held 2 mugs of coffee. I found something, Clara said, her voice raspy with morning fatigue. Casey walked over, handing her a mug. "Tell me." "Arthur," she said, pointing to the tablet. "He's sending money to the Volkoffs. It's not a payment for a hit. It's personal. Like he's trying to curry favor, or paying tribute." Casey looked at the screen. His eyes darkened. "Arthur has been with my father since before I was born. He held me at my baptism." "Then he's the perfect person to betray you," Clara said softly, "because you'd never look at him." Casey stared at the data for a long time. The silence stretched, heavy and dangerous. Finally, he looked at Clara. There was a new respect in his gaze. "Get dressed," he said, his voice cold as ice. "The stylist is here. Make yourself beautiful, Clara. Tonight, we catch a traitor." The Art Institute of Chicago was closed to the public, but tonight it was alive with the glitter of diamonds and the murmur of deadly conversations. The Obsidian Gala was technically a charity fundraiser for art restoration, but in reality, it was the demilitarized zone of the Chicago underworld. Clara stood in front of a full-length mirror in the safe house, barely recognizing the reflection staring back. The stylist had been ruthless. Clara's mousy brown hair had been dyed a rich, deep mocha and styled in loose, glamorous waves. Her makeup was sharp, winged eyeliner that accentuated the steel grey of her eyes and a blood-red lip. But the dress was a weapon. It was black velvet, strapless, hugging every curve she didn't know she had, with a slit that ran dangerously high up her thigh. She wore diamond drop earrings that cost more than the building she lived in. "You look," Casey's voice trailed off as he walked into the room. He stopped. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. He looked devastatingly handsome and utterly lethal. "I look like a target," Clara finished, smoothing the velvet over her hip. "You look like a queen," Casey corrected, his voice low. He walked behind her, his eyes meeting hers in the mirror. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a delicate silver choker with a small ruby pendant. "Lift your hair." Clara obeyed, her pulse hammering in her throat. Casey's cool fingers brushed the back of her neck as he clasped the necklace. The intimacy of the gesture made her shiver. "This contains a tracker and a microphone," he whispered against her ear. "If you tap the ruby twice, Enzo and the extraction team come through the windows. Do not use it unless you are about to die. Understand?" "Yes," she breathed. "Good. Take my arm." The gala was a sensory overload. Champagne flowed like water, a string quartet played Mozart, and the room was filled with men who had ordered murders before breakfast. Clara clung to Casey's arm, her knuckles white. "Smile," Casey murmured, his face impassive. "You are bored. You are wealthy. You are untouchable." Clara forced a smile. She scanned the room. She saw the Volkov contingent immediately. They were loud, occupying the center of the room. At the center was Viktor Volkov, a bear of a man with a golden tooth and a laugh that sounded like a bark. Next to him was his son, Nikolai, young, handsome in a cruel way, with eyes that undressed every woman in the room. "Steady," Casey warned, feeling her tense. "They're looking at us," Clara whispered. "Let them look." Casey navigated the room, greeting people with polite nods. Finally, they reached a quiet alcove where his 4 lieutenants were waiting. Dominic, the money man, looked nervous, constantly checking his watch. Leo, the enforcer, was drinking heavily, scanning the room for threats. Sarah, the logistics chief, was typing on her phone, ignoring everyone. And Arthur smiled warmly. "Casey, my boy," Arthur said, opening his arms. "We were worried after the incident at the restaurant. Thank God you're safe." "Hard to kill, Arthur." "You know that," Casey said smoothly. "Allow me to introduce my cousin, Clara. She's visiting from Milan." Clara extended her hand. "Charmed," she said, affecting a slight accent she'd practiced in the car. Arthur took her hand. His palm was clammy. "A pleasure, my dear. A flower in a field of weeds." Clara watched him. She watched his eyes. They didn't linger on her. They flicked over her shoulder towards the Volkov group. "He's checking if they saw him talking to us," Clara realized. "Casey," Arthur said, leaning in. "We need to discuss the shipment coming in next Tuesday. With the heat on the streets, maybe we should delay." "Delay?" Casey raised an eyebrow. "That shipment is worth 20 million. We don't delay." "Just a thought. Caution is the better part of valor." Arthur smiled weakly. Suddenly a shadow fell over the group. "Vane!" a booming voice echoed. Viktor Volkov stood there, holding a glass of vodka. Nikolai stood beside him, smirking. The air in the room vanished. The string quartet seemed to falter, then kept playing nervously. "Victor," Casey acknowledged, his voice bored. "I heard you had some indigestion last night." Victor laughed, a wet, heavy sound. "Bad clams?" "Something like that," Casey replied. "I handled it. The trash has been taken out." Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Good to hear. It would be a shame if something happened to you before our negotiations next month." Nikolai stepped forward, stepping into Clara's personal space. He smelled of expensive cologne and vodka. "And who is this?" Nikolai asked, reaching out to touch a lock of Clara's hair. Casey didn't move, but Clara felt the muscles in his arm turn to stone. "Don't touch me," Clara said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. She slapped his hand away. Not a gentle push. A sharp, stinging slap. The circle of people around them gasped. "You didn't slap a Volkov." Nikolai's face darkened instantly. "You little bitch." He raised his hand. Casey caught Nikolai's wrist in midair. The movement was so fast it was a blur. Casey gripped the wrist, twisting it slowly. Nikolai grimaced, dropping to one knee to alleviate the pressure. "She said, 'Don't touch her,'" Casey said softly. The menace in his voice was terrifying, because it was so quiet. "If you ever reach for her again, Nikolai, you will be eating your dinner through a straw." Victor stepped forward, his face red. "Release my son, Vane, or we start the war right here." Casey held the gaze for a second longer, then shoved Nikolai backward. The younger man stumbled, clutching his wrist, hate burning in his eyes. "Control your dog, Victor," Casey said, adjusting his cufflinks. "This is a charity event. Try to have some class." Casey turned his back on them, the ultimate insult, and steered Clara away. As they walked toward the balcony for air, Clara's legs felt like jelly. "I shouldn't have done that. I made it worse." "You were perfect," Casey said. "You showed strength. Weakness gets you killed here." They stepped out onto the balcony, the cold night air hitting them. They were alone. "Did you see Arthur?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. "I saw," Casey said grimly. "When Nikolai approached, Arthur didn't step between us. He stepped back. He wanted a clear line of sight, or he wanted to be out of the splash zone." "He looked at Victor," Clara added, "like he was seeking approval." "Casey, he's going to make a move tonight. I can feel it." Casey looked out at the city skyline. "Then we force his hand." "How?" "I'm going to announce that I'm moving the shipment to tonight," Casey said. "I'll tell only Arthur. If the Volkovs show up to raid it, then you know for sure," Clara finished. "Exactly." Casey turned to her. He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed her lower lip. The adrenaline of the confrontation was still humming between them, turning into something electric. "You did well, Clara. You have the heart of a lion." He leaned in. For a moment, Clara thought he was going to kiss her. She wanted him to. The danger, the power, it was intoxicating. But then the glass door to the balcony slid open. It was Arthur. He looked pale. He held a phone in his hand. "Casey," Arthur said, his voice tight. "I just got a call. It's the warehouse in the South Loop. It's on fire." Casey froze. He pulled away from Clara. "Which warehouse, Arthur?" Casey asked slowly. "The main one, where the shipment was supposed to go." Casey looked at Clara. A silent communication passed between them. Casey hadn't told Arthur about moving the shipment yet. If Arthur knew the shipment was the target, it was because he had helped plan the hit before Casey could even set the trap. Arthur had slipped up. He had revealed he knew the target before he should have. "That's unfortunate," Casey said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Enzo is there. Let's hope he's okay." Arthur's eyes widened slightly. "Enzo is there?" "Yes," Casey lied. "I sent him to check the perimeter an hour ago." Arthur's face went grey. If Enzo was there, and the Volkovs attacked, and Arthur had set it up. I need to make a call," Arthur stammered, backing away. "No," Casey said. He stepped forward, blocking the door. "You don't!" Casey pulled a gun from his tuxedo jacket. It was a sleek, black silencer. "Casey, wait!" Arthur cried, raising his hands. "You don't understand. They have my daughter. Victor, he took my daughter." Clara gasped. A twist. It wasn't greed. It was leverage. Casey didn't lower the gun. "Where is she?" "I don't know," Arthur sobbed, collapsing to his knees. "They said if I didn't help kill you at the restaurant, she would die. When that failed, they demanded the warehouse. Casey, please, I had no choice." Casey looked down at the old man who had been like a father to him. The betrayal cut deep, but the logic held. Casey looked at Clara. "What do your eyes tell you?" Clara looked at the sobbing man. She saw the terror, the genuine, pathetic breakdown. "He's telling the truth," Clara whispered. "He's not the enemy, Casey. He's a victim." Casey hesitated. Suddenly, Clara's hand flew to her neck. She tapped the ruby pendant twice. "Why did you do that?" Casey asked, confused. "Because," Clara said, looking past Casey, through the glass doors of the balcony, "we aren't alone." Casey spun around. On the rooftops opposite the museum, a glint of light flashed. A scope. "Down!" Casey roared. He tackled Clara just as the glass door shattered into 1,000 diamonds. A bullet slammed into the stone railing where Clara's head had been a second ago. Chaos erupted inside the gala. Screams, gunfire. They were pinned down on the balcony. Arthur was curled in a ball, wailing. "Sniper!" Casey yelled into his comms. "Enzo, we are pinned on the east balcony. Get the car." He looked at Clara beneath him. She was breathing hard, covered in glass shards, but her eyes were wide and alert. "You saw the scope," Casey said, almost in awe. "I saw the reflection," she corrected. "Casey, we can't stay here." "No," Casey grinned, a wild, dangerous look returning to his face. "We're leaving, but first we have to save the traitor." He grabbed Arthur by the collar and hauled him up. "Move, old man. If you want your daughter back, you live." Casey grabbed Clara's hand. "Run." The safe house was no longer a sanctuary. It was a war room. The air was thick with tension and the smell of rubbing alcohol as Enzo stitched a graze on Casey's arm. Arthur sat in the corner, a broken man, clutching a burner phone. "They sent a video," Arthur whispered, his voice trembling. "An hour ago. Proof of life." Casey didn't look up from his wound. "Play it." Arthur held up the phone. On the cracked screen, a young woman, Emily, Arthur's daughter, was tied to a chair in a dimly lit room. She was crying, a piece of duct tape over her mouth. The video lasted only 10 seconds before cutting to black. "There's nothing," Enzo grunted, peering at the screen. "No windows, no landmarks. Just concrete walls. It could be any basement in Chicago." "Play it again," Clara said. She was standing by the monitors, still wearing the ruined velvet dress, though she had kicked off her heels. "Clara, we don't have time," Enzo started. "Play it again," Casey commanded, his eyes fixing on Clara. Arthur played the video. Clara closed her eyes. She didn't watch the girl. She listened. She listened to the hum of the room, the breathing, the background noise. "Turn the volume up. Maximum," Clara ordered. Arthur obeyed. The tinny speakers strained. "There," Clara said, opening her eyes. "Did you hear that?" "I hear a girl crying," Enzo said, frustrated. "No, behind that. A low, rhythmic thumping. Thump, hiss, and then, right at the 6-second mark, a bell. Not a church bell. A warning bell." Clara walked over to the map of the city spread out on the table. Her finger hovered over the industrial districts. "The thumping is a hydraulic press," she said, her mind racing back to her days working a temp job at a canning factory. But it's slow. Old machinery. And the bell, that's a bridge warning. A drawbridge going up. There are 20 drawbridges in Chicago, Enzo pointed out. Yes, but the hydraulic press suggests a heavy manufacturing zone, Clara countered. And if you listen to the echo, the room is large but empty. It echoes like metal, not stone. She traced the river south. Here, the old ironworks district near the South Branch. There's a decommissioned stamping plant right next to the Kermack Road Bridge. The bridge is under repair. They test the lift mechanism every night at 10 p.m. The video was sent at 10:05 p.m. Casey stood up, the bandage on his arm forgotten. He looked at the map, then at Clara. The admiration in his eyes was naked now, burning hot. The Kermack Ironworks, Casey said. Volkov bought that property through a shell company 6 months ago. I thought he was laundering money through real estate. I didn't know he was building a dungeon. Casey turned to the weapon rack on the wall. He pulled down an assault rifle and a heavy vest. Enzo, get the team. We hit them in 20 minutes. Hard and fast. No prisoners. I'm coming, Arthur said, standing up shakily. You'll stay here, Casey said. You're compromised. I'm coming too, Clara said. Casey froze. He turned to her. Absolutely not. I know the layout of industrial stamping plants, Clara lied. She only knew the basics, but she knew she couldn't stay behind. She felt a pull toward Casey, a terrifying need to be near the fire. And I can drive. You need Enzo on the gun. You need a driver who won't panic when the shooting starts. Casey walked up to her. He was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him. He reached out and tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His hand lingered on her neck. If you come, he said, his voice a low growl, you will see things you can never unsee. You will have blood on your hands, Clara. There is no going back to the bistro after tonight. Clara looked into his dark eyes. She saw the abyss there, but she also saw safety. I quit the bistro yesterday, she whispered. Casey stared at her for a heartbeat longer, then nodded. He turned and threw the Kevlar vest at her. Put this on. Stay in the car unless I call for you. If I die, you drive away and you never stop. The Kermack Ironworks loomed like the skeleton of a dead beast against the night sky. Rusting smokestacks pierced the fog, and the only sound was the distant clank hiss of the cooling systems. The Vane family convoy, 3 black SUVs, sat in stealth mode 2 blocks away. Lights off, engines silent. Thermal shows 8 heat signatures on the ground floor, Enzo reported from the front seat. 2 in the upper office. That's likely where the girl is. And the Volkovs? Casey asked from the back seat, checking his magazine. Victor is there. Nikolai, too. I recognize the heat profile of Nikolai's cane. He's favoring his left leg after you twisted him up. Casey looked at Clara next to him. She was drowning in the tactical vest, her hands gripping the steering wheel of the lead SUV. When we breach, they will flush out the back, Casey told her. Your job is to cut off the alley. Do not let Nikolai leave. Do you understand? I understand, Clara said. Her heart was a drum in her ears, but her hands were steady. Go, Casey commanded. The doors flew open. Casey, Enzo, and 4 other heavily armed men melted into the shadows. Clara sat alone in the dark car. She watched the factory. Silence. Then, boom. The front doors of the factory blew inward. Flashbangs turned the night white. Then the staccato rhythm of automatic gunfire erupted. It was deafening. Clara grip tightened on the wheel. She watched the tactical feed on the dashboard tablet. Green dots, Casey's team, were swarming red dots. Volkov's men. Clear left, stairs, Enzo's voice screamed over the comms. I have the girl. Emily is secure. Arthur's voice cracked through the radio. Casey had let him join the extraction team. Pull back. We have the package, Casey ordered. But then the dashboard feed changed. 2 red dots separated from the group and sprinted toward the rear exit. They're running, Clara whispered to herself. She didn't wait for the order. She slammed the SUV into gear, tires screaming as she peeled out. She drifted the heavy vehicle around the corner of the factory, debris pinging off the chassis. She slammed on the brakes, blocking the narrow alleyway with the bulk of the SUV. The rear door of the factory burst open. Nikolai Volkov stumbled out, dragging his father, Viktor. Viktor was clutching his chest, blood seeping through his fingers. They froze when they saw the black SUV blocking their path. Nikolai raised his gun. Clara ducked. The windshield shattered. Glass rained down on her vest. "Drive!" her instinct screamed. Run him over, but she couldn't. She wasn't a killer, not yet. She threw the car into reverse, spinning the wheel to use the engine block as a shield. Nikolai fired again, advancing. He was limping, desperate. Suddenly a shadow dropped from the fire escape above them. Casey landed in a crouch between the SUV and the Volkovs. He rose to his full height, his gun leveled. "Drop it, Nikolai," Casey said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the chaos like a razor. Nikolai laughed, a manic sound. "You can't kill us both, Vane. My reinforcements are 2 minutes out." "I don't need 2 minutes," Casey said. Viktor, the great bear of the underworld, slumped against the brick wall. He looked at Casey. "You win, boy, you win." "No," Nikolai screamed. "I don't lose to a waiter-loving traitor." Nikolai swung his gun toward the driver's side window, toward Clara. Bang! One shot. Nikolai's head snapped back. He crumbled to the ground, dead before he hit the concrete. Casey stood there, smoke curling from the barrel of his gun. He hadn't hesitated. Not for a microsecond. Viktor looked at his dead son, then up at Casey. The old man closed his eyes. "Do it!" "None." Casey walked over. He looked down at the man who had tried to poison him, who had kidnapped a child, who had threatened Clara. "This is for Chicago," Casey said. Bang! Silence returned to the alley. The only sound was the distant sirens of police cars that Casey had already paid to be slow. Casey turned. He walked towards the SUV. The windshield was gone. He reached through the broken glass and unlocked the door. He pulled the door open. Clara was shaking now, the adrenaline crash hitting her hard. "Are you hurt?" Casey asked, scanning her for blood. "No," she gasped. I'm okay." Casey reached in and unbuckled her seatbelt. He pulled her out of the car into the cold night air. He didn't let go of her. He pulled her against his chest, burying his face in her hair. He smelled of gunpowder and iron, but his hold was desperate, possessive. "You blocked the exit," he murmured against her neck. "You trapped them." "I told you," Clara whispered, gripping his tactical vest. "I'm not a waitress anymore." 3 months had passed since the gunfire at the ironworks ceased, but the echoes of that night had only just begun to settle into the rhythm of the city. Winter had bled into a wet, grey spring, and Le Ciel had reopened its doors. To the casual observer, the restaurant looked better than ever. The crime scene tape was long gone, replaced by velvet ropes that held back a line of eager patrons hoping for a cancellation. The stain on the plush carpet, where a fake waiter had been tackled by Enzo, had been excised and replaced by a hand-woven Persian rug that cost more than a luxury sedan. The bullet hole in the mahogany paneling near the kitchen had been filled, sanded, and varnished until not even a ghost could find it. But for those who knew, the politicians, the judges, and the rival captains of industry who filled the tables, the restaurant had changed fundamentally. It was no longer just a place to eat. It was a monument to the Vane family's victory. It was the throne room of the new Chicago. Clara Hayes sat at table 4. It was the same table she used to serve. She remembered the specific wobble of the 4th leg, the way the draft from the vent used to hit the back of her neck when she poured water. But tonight, she felt no draft. Tonight, she was the one being served. She wasn't wearing the stained white apron that smelled of dish soap and onions. She was draped in a gown of blood-red silk that clung to her frame like a second skin, leaving her back bare to the cool air of the room. At her throat, the ruby pendant, the tactical tracker Casey had given her, was gone. In its place rested a diamond choker, cold and heavy, a loop of ice that caught the candlelight and threw fractured rainbows across her collarbone. It didn't signify surveillance anymore. It signified ownership. Partnership. Ricard, the floor manager who had once hissed at her to stop making eye contact with the guests, approached the table. He was sweating, his usual oily arrogance replaced by a trembling subservience. He held a bottle of vintage Pinot Noir as if it were a holy relic. "Mr. Vane." Miss Hayes," Ricard stammered, his eyes darting to the floor. He couldn't look at her. The cognitive dissonance of serving the woman he had once threatened to fire was breaking him. "The 96 vintage, as requested." Clara watched him. She saw the tremor in his hand. She remembered how he used to dock her pay for being 5 minutes late, how he would make her clean the grease traps if she didn't smile enough. "Thank you, Ricard," Clara said. Her voice was calm, melodic, and utterly terrifying in its politeness. She didn't dismiss him immediately. She let him stand there for a beat too long, letting him sweat in the silence. Will there be anything else?" he squeaked. "Not for now," Casey answered, dismissing the man with a flick of his hand. Casey Vane sat opposite her, watching the interaction with a faint, predatory amusement. He looked different too. The perpetual tension that used to tighten the muscles of his jaw, the hyper-vigilance of a man waiting for a knife in the dark, had softened. He wasn't less dangerous. If anything, he was more so. But he was no longer hunted. He was the apex predator, resting after a feast. He took the bottle from the table and poured the wine himself. He didn't let the staff touch their glasses. That was a new rule. Only Casey poured for Clara. "You enjoyed that," Casey noted, sliding the crystal glass toward her. "He used to call me sweetheart when he wanted me to work a double shift for no overtime," Clara said, lifting the glass. "Watching him shake is therapeutic." "He knows who you are now," Casey said, leaning back. "They all do." Clara took a sip of the wine. It tasted like dark cherries and earth. She let her gaze drift across the dining room. She saw the way the conversations lulled when she looked in their direction. She saw the respectful nods from the table of union leaders in the corner. She saw the fear in the eyes of the new busboy who was trying desperately not to drop a tray. "The merger?" Clara asked, shifting the topic to the only thing that mattered in their world. "Business. Complete," Casey replied, his voice low. "The Volkov territories have been absorbed. Their distribution networks in the South Loop are now running our product. We didn't even have to fire a shot. After Victor and Nikolai fell, the captains fell in line. They value profit over loyalty. And the West Side? Quiet as a grave. The gangs know better than to move against us while the blood is still drying on the pavement." Casey reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, cream-colored envelope. He slid it across the white tablecloth. Clara picked it up. It was heavy cardstock. Inside was a simple photo of a sunset over a beach and a short, handwritten note. "Thank you." "Arthur," she whispered. "He's in Boca Raton," Casey said, watching her reaction closely. "He and Emily. I bought them a house under a shell company. It's small, quiet, far away from the cold." Clara ran her thumb over the handwriting. Arthur had betrayed them. By the old laws of the Mafia, by the code Casey had lived by his entire life, Arthur should be buried in a foundation somewhere. But Clara had stopped it. She had seen the difference between malice and desperation. She had convinced Casey that mercy, used correctly, was a greater show of power than violence. "You did the right thing," Clara said. "Killing him would have made you a monster. Letting him go makes you a king." "It makes me soft," Casey countered, though there was no bite in his words. "It makes you unpredictable," Clara corrected, "and that is much scarier." Casey chuckled, a dark, rich sound that made the couple at the next table glance over nervously. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. His skin was warm, his grip firm. It was the hand of a killer, but it held her with a reverence that made her breath hitch. He fell silent for a moment, his thumb tracing the line of her knuckles. The air between them grew heavy, charged with the electricity that had sparked in the back of an SUV and ignited in a warehouse shootout. "You know," Casey said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was only for her, "the offer still stands." Clara stilled. "What offer?" "The exit," Casey said. He looked at her with an intensity that stripped away the glamour of the evening. "You have the money now. Your share of the Volkov seizure is in an offshore account. It's more than you could spend in 3 lifetimes. You have the connections. I could have a plane ready in an hour." He squeezed her hand. "You could go to Paris, Clara. You could open that bakery you used to talk about, or a gallery, or just sit in a cafe and read books where no one knows your name. You could be safe. Truly safe." Clara looked at him. She searched his face for any sign that he wanted her to leave. She saw none. She saw a man who was willing to let the only light in his life walk away if it meant saving her from the darkness he inhabited. She thought about the safety he offered. She thought about her old apartment with the leaking radiator. She thought about the invisibility of poverty, the way people looked through her as if she were made of glass. She thought about the silence she had lived in for 20 years, swallowing her anger, swallowing her pride, just to survive another week. Then she thought about the weight of the gun in her hand at the ironworks. She thought about the rush of adrenaline as she blocked the alleyway. She thought about the way the room had gone silent when she walked in tonight. She looked at Casey, the scars on his hands, the intelligence in his eyes, the brutal, beautiful power he wielded. He was a monster, yes, but he was her monster. And standing beside him, she wasn't invisible. She was burning bright enough to blind them all. "I don't want to be safe, Casey," she said softly. Casey tilted his head slightly. "No, it's a nice life. Quiet, predictable. Safety is for people who are afraid of the dark," Clara replied, her voice gaining strength, steel entering her tone. "I've lived in the quiet. I've lived in the safe, small corners where I was told I belonged. I hated every second of it." She turned her hand over, lacing her fingers through his. The contrast of her pale skin against his tan hand was stark. "I don't want a quiet life," she whispered. "I don't want to be a spectator anymore." Casey smiled. It wasn't his public smile, the polite mask he wore for the politicians. It was a smile that reached his eyes, a wolfish, possessive expression that made her heart hammer against her ribs. "What do you want, Clara?" he asked. Clara leaned forward. The candlelight danced in her eyes, reflecting a hunger that matched his own. She tightened her grip on his hand. "I want everything," she said. Casey lifted her hand to his lips. He kissed her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. It was a seal, a vow, a coronation. "Then," Casey murmured against her skin, "everything is yours." Clara Hayes, the girl who had once been invisible, turned her head to look out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling, glittering skyline of Chicago. The city lights looked like diamonds scattered on black velvet. It was beautiful. It was dangerous. And it was hers. She didn't need to make a hidden signal with her hands anymore. She didn't need to hide in the shadows. She was the signal, and the whole world was finally listening. And that is how a single silent gesture changed the fate of an entire city. From a terrified waitress to the queen of the Chicago underworld, Clara's story proves that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun. It's the ability to see what others miss. If you enjoyed this twist-filled mafia romance, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What would you have done in Clara's position? Would you have taken the money and ran, or stayed for the power? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss a story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.